Good afternoon and welcome to today's Regulatory Hour hosted by the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy. I'm Stephen Sugar, Treasurer of the Board of Directors, and I'm happy to be your moderator and to introduce our speaker. Just a quick note, this session is being recorded. We're hoping for a lively and interactive session today, so if you have a comment or a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand. Our speaker today is Dale Atkinson. Dale's an attorney who earned his law degree from Northwestern School of Law in Portland, Oregon, and now lives in Utah. He's a well-known speaker for regulatory groups like ours and works with organizations on everything from education to licensing to board meetings and legal guidance. Today, Dale will be sharing his expertise on board meetings. Please welcome Dale.
Stephen, thank you. And I can see a few people. So Stephen, give me the thumbs up. You can hear me and you can see the screen. I think we're good to go. So thank you for that introduction. And let me add my welcome to each and every one of you as well. I started all my presentations with a very sincere thank you. First, we're going to recognize the Florida Panthers for the Stanley Cup win last night. But if there are Oiler fans on the line today, sorry about that. But more importantly is the thank yous and the recognition. So certainly number one is a big thanks to, I see a thumbs down there somewhere, but a big thanks to your board of directors for what they do for your organization, the policy setting and the leadership that they provide, and the volunteerism. So, Stephen, to you and the board of directors, a big shout out. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of your family and be a part of the regulatory hour. Secondly, to Jeff and Rich and the rest of the staff, a big shout out. Thanks to the FSBPT staff and the operationalization of the programs and services, including today's. So need to be recognized. A big shout out, thanks, and the biggest thanks goes to each and every one of you on the line today for the important role you play in regulation and public protection. You're not thanked enough, and so I will thank you and give a big shout out. Thanks to each and every one of you for not only what you are, not only for being here today, but for what you do for regulation in general and public protection. So big shout out, thanks. As mentioned by Stephen, today we would like really to get you to participate. This is a really difficult topic, and I know in preparing for it, I was trying to figure out how best to convey some of the points. And I think one of the best ways to convey points is to have you all talk and identify perhaps some of the strengths and weaknesses of board meetings themselves. Many of you attend, most of you attend your own board meetings. You may not have an opportunity to attend other board meetings, and you can certainly learn from one another. And while I'm on that topic, I'll throw out that intra-state, so intra whatever jurisdiction you're in, if you have opportunities to either attend a board meeting of another regulatory board within your state, try it, attend it, or alternatively, or in addition to, stimulate combined meetings. And the Board of Physical Therapy might stimulate combined meetings with the Board of Veterinary Medicine or the Acupuncture Board or the Massage Therapy Board or others where you may have overlapping issues that are of relevance to one another. And stimulating those types of interactions can be, I think, extremely helpful in not only identifying where you have commonalities, but to identify some of the differences that may need to be addressed either legislatively or through promulgation of regulations and otherwise. So take advantage of your regulatory community and the opportunities that exist intra-state, but related to FSBPT and your interstate relationships with other physical therapy boards. Again, welcome and thank you for being here. So please feel free to chat, use the chat, use the unmute and speak, raise your hand. You can interrupt, whatever it takes to have us create an interactive session today so that we can exchange information and ideas that may be beneficial to everyone. So if you think it's a good question for you, it's probably a good question for everybody on the line today. So feel free to take advantage of that and participate. You can start by putting in your cheers for the Florida Panthers if you'd like into that chat. Then I'll know you're listening and you know how to use the chat. So As mentioned, I'm Dale Atkinson. I'm an attorney, and I do represent a whole bunch of FSBPT-like organizations. I've spent my entire 39-year career representing groups like yours, so I'm hoping my historical perspective and experiences will benefit us today. So just a little bit about me, and it's and as I've mentioned now, this topic is a difficult topic, I think, and it's difficult because I think every board thinks they have good board meetings and they do things, so not necessarily rules out there that exist other than perhaps executive session and other more identified formal issues. But in general, how do you hold a good board meeting, and what is a good board meeting, and how is that going to work? So as I put in there in the title here, of course, my board does it best. And we all may feel that way to some degree, but that's fine. And so let's take advantage of those best thoughts and share them with each other to see how we can again, make this a productive session. So if you can't read the line there, it says the purpose of today's meeting is to look very busy, like we're actually accomplishing something. And so just a little humor side to getting this started on a topic that again, as I've mentioned, is a difficult topic, and it may feel like a dry topic, but it is really critical, I think, that regulatory boards, physical therapy boards, and all regulatory boards in general, step back and reflect upon board meetings and the messages that they send, both positive and negative, about how board meetings are conducted, or if board meetings are even had on a regular basis. And the messages that sends not only to the immediate population of licensees, consumers, applicants, students, and others, but also to the legislature. Do not forget that canceled meetings, having very few board meetings, having board meetings that last 20 minutes, they send messages to those outside of your community that may not understand what regulatory boards do. And so again, the idea behind today's topic is to address maybe some best practices that maybe perhaps do exist, and provide information exchanges with each other on today's call. So to get us started, perspective is really important. And I think how board members, executive directors, administrators, attorneys, investigators, inspectors, or others that are involved view a board meeting, and a good board meeting and perhaps not so good of a board meeting might be very different. So if you want to go ahead and just type into the chat, if you're a board member, if you're an exec or administrator, if you're an attorney, or any other category that I may have missed. Again, that'll tell me, one, we're listening, two, we know how to use the chat, and it'll get us all started in understanding how to participate in today's session. So we've got an administrator, and again, I think it's important to understand the perspectives that do exist, and how and from that perspective, what constitutes if you will, a good board meeting. So it looks like we have a pretty good mix of board members, including a couple board chairs, and presiding officers, you board chairs. We're going to get to a slide on your role in just a minute here, but as well as some executive directors and a couple of attorneys. So keep that perspective in mind, but in the end, what is a good board meeting to all of us? And kind of as a stimulating thought to FSBPT, and having represented groups like yours for my entire career, as I've mentioned, the idea behind the collective wisdom of an FSBPT, and the collective wisdom is through your voices, it's through the regulatory community, through the member boards, visions, and other ideas that might exist, perhaps coming out of this session today and maybe stimulating some future thought, might be a model board agenda for a meeting, or other aspect that might be helpful to the entire physical therapy regulatory community. So I put that out there just as the potential take-home point for your organization, and maybe each and every one of you will have take-home points that you're going to share with each other as we go. So let's start out with stepping back and saying, well, why do physical therapy boards have meetings to begin with? What is the purpose of a meeting? And this is a topic, I don't know if we think about that often, if we even, understand its relevance to this, but if anybody wants to unmute and tell me the purpose of a physical therapy regulatory board meeting, feel free to do that. If you want to type it into the chat, obviously feel free to do that as well. Do we have any folks that want to volunteer to get us started today? What's the meeting for? And you all are talking in bunches usually, so
Conduct business.
conduct business. What does that mean, Jerry?
Jerry, Pennsylvania, take action on matters that, disciplinary matters, discuss, regulatory issues that are upcoming, those types of things.
Excellent. And thank you for stepping forward, and you get dinner for two at your favorite restaurant. Steven's going to send you a certificate, so just look for that in the mail. And thank you for getting it started here and unmuting and speaking. And I see a comment written into the chat here too. A public meeting is the only time and place that group decision making is done by the body. And I think that's a pretty good summary to get us started, along with what Jerry said too, that there's some of the specifics that are undertaken. But this is the time when you get together and act as a board, you act as a group decision making, and perhaps even equally important to these big picture issues that Jerry and Mark have referenced, and that is the public gets to attend and watch. And many of you are probably used to maybe having very few people, if any, at your board meetings themselves. And for those of you who have attended my previous sessions, you know that I promote inviting folks to your meetings, filling up the room, and having the community, the regulatory community, the legislative community, the executive branch, and your licensees and others, having them see you in action and having them understand that you're human beings making decisions under a regulatory structure and otherwise. But this is the time, at a board meeting is the time when you can best then share those issues, have individuals see you in action, and maybe have a better understanding of the regulatory community. Now, when they show up, hopefully you have a, if you will, quality board meeting, and that's what today's topic is all about. So another couple other comments have been written in there: regulate and follow the intent of the legislation, provide public safety, public protection, excellent, hear concerns from the public. So I'm hearing an agenda item, at least from Jane, is the public gets to participate. And so let's put a pin in that, because it's going to come up a little bit later as well on a slide. But another response to that, we do not allow the public to speak, which is frustrating. So Ira, I'm not sure which jurisdiction that is, and of course, there's two sides to every coin about allowing the public to speak. What's said, how much you can, if you will, control, what you should reply to, which is probably none, and others. And so these are all really good points to get us started as to how can we put together the best board meeting. And you can see up there that the thoughts on this is now they're percolating from you. And the perspective, as I mentioned earlier, from the board member may be very different from the executive. And it also may be very different from the attorney who represents the board. And there may be some reluctance to have certain things said out loud in an open session with others there listening. So these are all points that you, the regulatory community, have to take into consideration when you are determining not only the agendas and how the board meeting is going to function and be run, but also what you say and how you phrase certain matters. And that board members should reflect prior to saying their thoughts to ensure that it's representative of not only the topic, but that it's consistent with the law and other issues that might surface. And so those perspectives may differ. And so we see one more comment at some point. Can we talk about Zoom versus in person? So there will be a slide on that as well, Ira. So, but if you have a question you want to ask it, make sure you ask it, and you can do it now or when we get to it in the slide. So keep those questions and comments coming. And Ira, if we don't address it to your satisfaction, please let me know and tell us that. So let me advance it. There we go. So, and one other point from the perspectives of the obvious that we talked about, and that's the students. And as you all, for those of you who've heard me speak, is invite students to meetings, let students be exposed to the regulatory community so they're not fearful of nor intimidated by the board itself. And take your meetings perhaps to the schools themselves, let the students come and watch. These are just all ideas to get that word out. But as I've mentioned, when you do this, you need to have a well-run board meeting itself. The public, academics, trade, and whomever might be attending and your meetings and the perspectives that they might bring to the table. Now, it's important, I think, for us to all recognize, and myself certainly, that you may not be in control of some of the issues that we talk about today. You may not be able to facilitate changes as easily as you would like. So the next so-called assignment for you to either unmute and tell us or put it into the chat is what is the governance structure of your board? Is it a standalone board? And you can ask, but is it a
Jerry, Pennsylvania,
standalone
we are a
board?
standalone board.
Standalone, excellent. And we've got composites as another, if you will, category. We've got departmentalized jurisdictions that boards are more an advisory role up into the bureaucracy of the department. And there may be some others that exist that I'm missing in the category. So feel free to clarify some of those, but we've got some standalone, mostly standalones now that are identifying themselves. And I will make a little editorial side comment too about participation in sessions like today, participations in programs and services provided by FSBPT, attendance of annual meetings. Does that have an effect related to the governance structure that exists? So we've got some departmentalized, a couple of standalones as well. So and then Jane is a board of multiple professions being regulated under one little roof, if you will, and that's what I would call a composite board. So it looks like we have a good representation of perhaps multiple structures that exist. And then again, continuing with our participation and assignments, do you consider your board to be an operational board? You consider your board to be a generative or strategic? And I hesitated on putting combined because like everybody's going to put combined, but take a stand on this. And do you feel like you're more of an operational board, or do you feel like you're in a generative board and you have strategic discussions and you think about issues of fulfilling that legislative intent in a strategic manner, or are you more of an operational board? And a lot of that sometimes has to do with fewer licensees and fewer staff drive the board into being an operational board rather than having the time, if you will, to be more generative. And so we've got a lot of combinations. I kind of thought that that's how it would come up, but we've got some operational boards identified as well. And that I think helps us determine, well, what is a good board meeting? And a good board meeting for a regenerative or strategic thinking board is, I think, going to have a different feel than a, if you will, good board meeting of an operational board. And of course, the combinations are going to try to have characteristics of them both. So how you view yourself and then how you develop those agendas can be an important component to what is a good board meeting and how are we going to get there as well. In addition, is frequency of board meetings, and I do this to collect the information in my own head. FSBPT, your organization, can make use out of these chats and these answers as well. But how often do you meet? Monthly, quarterly, or any other? So feel free to just put that in there as well. So every 2 months, and the less frequent you meet, obviously will affect the agendas and the board meetings and perhaps the length of those meetings, which we're going to get to in just a second. How long is a meeting? But every 2 months, monthly, 4 times a year. And I realize that these are driven by many factors and some factors outside of your control. But I'm also assuming that if you all feel you need to meet more often, you can stimulate that and you can have meetings as often as you need to fulfill your obligations and responsibilities of carrying out the intent of the legislation. So if anybody has any comments about that, feel free. Most statutes will say you have to meet at least X number of times per year, but you can meet as needed. So you may have more meetings than that, and more meetings than set forth in the statute. And I also realize that some of you have committees, and committees meet, and others. So we'll focus on the full board meetings where business is conducted, rather than the committee meetings that may make recommendations to the full board. So maybe too, the question that was asked earlier is when you meet, do you meet in person? Do you meet virtually, or is there a hybrid? Feel free to put that into the chats as well, or unmute. And was that Ira who had the question about the in person? If you'd like to unmute now and just give us your point, we'll be happy to address it. And while you're contemplating doing that, oh, go ahead, Ira, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we've met virtually since 2020, since COVID. So, and for me, it's a very frustrating experience. I mean, I appreciate this Zoom meeting, but since we're all over the country, but when a board is local and everybody lives pretty close to where we meet, including staff, meeting virtually is very frustrating. I'm making decisions with a group of people that I've served on the board with for 5 years and I've never met. And I think there's a lot of value in in-person meetings. And even though open meeting laws prevent discussion between two people, there's still, chit-chat side water cooler discussions that are important for people getting to know each other. And that doesn't happen virtually.
And Ira, where are you from? Sorry.
Colorado.
Colorado. I think you put that up there. So let's start with a couple of points made. And let's start with the lawyer side and that is the water cooler outside the meeting issue is going to be discouraged, as you know, and I'm sure that that's not news to you. But if it's a content-driven discussion outside the board meeting, you can run afoul of these open meeting laws and others. So follow advice of your counsel, but I'm sure that you are, you have these discussions and you're advised of what is a board meeting and all, and what constitutes that, and to limit your discussions within the meeting itself. So let's put that aside for just a second. And I agree with you. Meetings like we're having now are a little more difficult, right? And if you all were sitting in the room, I would have a much better vibe for what the room feels like. I'd have a much better vibe for if the points I'm making are sticking, you'd have a much better opportunity to talk to each other and myself or whatever. So I do agree with you. In-person meetings are considerably more productive in my mind, since today's topic is about good board meetings and do we do it best. So I do agree with you. However, not only driven by COVID, but driven by other factors, not only the development of technology, but the monetary savings and otherwise, because although in Colorado, it may be easy to get to Denver or, wherever the meeting is going to be held, it may not be as easy in Montana or a large physical geographic jurisdiction. So there's balances being made, and, Ira brings up some good points. So if anybody else has anything to say about that, I see, and I agree with you there. We've got some hybrid meetings, but can you conduct business? Can you have an efficient and effective board if you only meet virtually and you've never in person actually met the individuals that are helping you in your decision-making process, including staff, by the way, the staff side of it. So if anybody has any comments on that, and let's start with anyone who wants to unmute and say you have to meet in person. Is there anyone on the line where the law requires you to meet in person? Feel free to unmute and just tell us that, so we know that. It's probably rare that happens, Ira, where it's required by law. The virtual,
right.
Go ahead.
Ohio is required to meet by in person in Ohio. There's
Excellent.
no exception for virtual.
Okay. So there's an example, Ira, that you can point to as you are helping your board determine how best it is you can carry out your responsibilities, even if it's not required.
Missy, during COVID, did you meet? I assume you met virtually then.
Yeah, there was an exception made due to the national emergency.
How long did that last?
Once,
How long did that last?
well,
Your
you're
meeting?
testing my memory, but at a couple, I think probably a year and a half or so, it was around the time where you know, people just started getting back to it. They weren't, we were not hybrid for very long, maybe a year or so.
And go ahead.
Hey, Dale, David, North Carolina. How are you doing?
Good.
So yeah, we are required by the governor to meet in person. There was exceptions during the state of emergency, but I think we all felt kind of withdrawal during COVID, not being able to meet in person, and we were just really anxious to get back in person. So I think there's a great deal of benefit to being able to meet in person.
Yeah, and I think you're singing Ira's song there. I mean, he feels the same way, and that's, you know, and there's something to be said about that from an efficiency and effective standpoint. So for Missy and David, are your meetings always in the Capitol, or do you move it around?
We have office space that had a boardroom that was large enough, and then they sold it and changed it up. So now we actually use the boardroom of the dental licensing board. And so that's in the Raleigh-Durham area, which is the capital.
Missy, do you move your meetings around, or do you have them all in Columbus?
No, they are all in Columbus.
Got it. Okay. And you know, I don't know if that's a really a relevant issue that I bring up, but I am an advocate for moving meetings around and allowing others to attend, because I naively think that people are going to attend and they're going to like coming to your meetings. So, because I would, but so any other comments about in-person mandates versus not? And I'm going to touch on a couple of other points. And if any lawyers on the line want to weigh in, is there are a few jurisdictions, and I don't remember which ones they are right now offhand, but where in order to have a meeting, you have to have a quorum in person, and then other board members can attend virtually. So Ira, that's a potential that lurks out there. So it does bring at least the quorum within in person together.
Just aside, not to harp on, but I've tried that. The problem is our staff don't want to come in, so therefore, even if board members wanted to meet, the staff are not there to facilitate the meeting and provide the space. One thing's interesting is everybody thinks you get a better turnout with public, but we've seen the opposite. Since we've gone virtually, very few public individuals attend the meeting. We had much better participation from public stakeholders, et cetera, when we met in person.
So you're meeting via Zoom, and if I wanted to go attend the Colorado meeting, I would just log in and get to watch, right? Is that
correct? And very few people do that, or they do that for a few minutes and then they leave. When people used to attend in person, they would come for the entire meeting.
Yeah, we did it a little different. We actually simulcast on YouTube, so as to meet the criteria for public accessibility. So, but nobody ever came.
Riveting television. That's what your board meetings would be, right?
Exactly. C-SPAN at its best.
And I see a comment from Massachusetts too. In person does limit those who could serve on the board, or maybe perhaps those willing to serve on the board if there's a fair amount of travel. So there's that other side of the equation as well, as to discouraging board members from serving if they're required to travel on a, let's say, monthly basis to the Capitol, which may be far away. So we have to balance all of this and determine what works best, if you will, for purposes of your jurisdiction. And then we have the hybrid option up there as well. And I think to Ira's point, and to everybody who's spoken, is not only is it board member attendance, but as Ira noted, it's staff attendance, and then it's the public's attendance. And how can that best be facilitated to ensure, again, that we, the regulatory community, get the word out as to what boards do? Because to me, that's what good board meetings do. They facilitate not only the conducting of business and requirements of law and the transparency side, but it also facilitates knowledge about what regulatory boards do. Because I'm amazed at how little folks know about boards themselves. And those, by the way, include the elected officials who are enacting laws that create you and delegate you with the authority, still may not have the knowledge base that is necessary. So when you meet, whether you're in person, hybrid, or virtual, all very, very good points that are being brought up today. And is there a right answer? No. And you're going to do what the law allows, and you're going to do what the board allows. But perhaps through Iris type comments and others, you can stimulate at least meeting in person on a annual basis, for example, or others, and then open the door to the options of virtual during meetings throughout the rest of the year. So these are just options and ideas. And I'm just reading a couple of comments here, attempting to broadcast meetings, and there's some there's some cost issues to that probably as well. But even though technology has improved, we still have board members that struggle virtually. So if my internet went out right now, what would we all do? Stop talking to each other. And another, again, another point that Ira would agree with, I think, is that there's a technology side and a glitch side and a loss of internet or Wi-Fi side that then gets in the way of good decision making and good discussions prior to that decision making. So make your points, write them down, and there's nothing wrong, by the way, with making a motion that says you prefer to meet in person at least once a year or something, and help set policy that exists. As long as the law allows you to do that, you can help stimulate that. So these are some of the ideas, and I'm glad we're having this conversation because that's what a good board meeting is, and has already been identified. Can you have a good board meeting virtually? As we've already emphasized, could this session today be better if we were all sitting in the same room? Probably, but how's that going to work itself out? So we've talked maybe enough about this, but the use of technology, do you audio record the meetings? Are those available to the public to listen? Do you do video in addition to the audio? Are those available? Do you live stream? So we've heard of all of this, or do you not do any of these? So is there any group that wants to put in the chat or unmute and admit that we don't do any technological recordings? We do it all by note taking. And that has an aspect side to it as well, which would, I think, facilitate the in-person meetings. But I think technology really allows, at a very minimal cost, for recordings to be had. And I'll throw in the other comment too, is what happens to those recordings? Are they saved? Are they on the website? Can I log in and watch something or listen to something, or both? Is there a law that requires them to be saved, or are they required to be deleted? And then eventually we'll get to a slide about executive session. So there's a lot to be had here related to these technological issues that do exist. So one more time, again, participation. How long do your meetings last? Minutes, hours, days, weeks? The weeks, obviously, a little tongue in cheek there, but in preparing for today, in looking cross professions, by the way, not only physical therapy, but others, I've noticed multiple board meeting minutes that I found. And by the way, I can't remember if it was my last session or the session before, but we talked about minutes of board meetings. They're absolutely critical to getting the word out in an appropriate manner as to what the board does. And so we've got hours up there, we've got a couple of days up there. So what's relevant to your time frames you're putting up there too is how often you meet. So if you don't meet very often and you have a couple day meeting, that may be different. If you meet every month and you're only a couple hours. So we're going to take all of this into consideration, but I will say this: in reading minutes, preparing for today, and actually the last session when we talked about minutes, the last regulatory hour when I talked about minutes, it's interesting how board meetings can be 12 minutes long, and what message does that send? As I started the session out talking about, so we got 6 hours, 3 hours. They meet monthly. 2 full days in person in Alaska. So it's going to vary. And how are we going to best meet the needs and the intent of the legislation? How can you as a regulatory community best meet the needs of that? So who attends? Your meetings, obviously board members, staff, maybe attorneys should be at every meeting. You have guests, elected officials, executive branch. I won't overemphasize what I've talked about in previous regulatory hours, but that is inviting people to your meetings. I would invite elected officials to the meetings from the legislature. I'd invite the executive branch. I would invite the media, academics, trade. So you have others there, not just respondents and lawyers that see the adverse action side of what you do as regulators, but perhaps others that see your board in action. Again, facilitated by a good board meeting. But I would offer, if I could do this, if I ran a board, if I was the exec and had the authority to do this, all attendees, licensees would get free CE. Get some CE, come to the board meeting, see us in action and watch us. And so again, have a good board meeting, but who comes to these meetings? And feel free to put that into the chat or unmute if you've got something to add about that. So how and when is the meeting notice published? So you're going to have to give notice, and generally that notice would have an agenda attached to it, and that agenda limits you to decision-making issues related to what the public was noticed up about. And you can't read this, I'm sure, and I'm kind of glad you can't, because I think I did a screenshot of the wrong page. And this isn't a physical therapy, it was other groups, and this is from Florida and the Florida Administrative Register of their notice up. But what I find interesting is what Florida says is a copy of the agenda may be obtained by contacting the board. And so they're not, I published in advance. So if anybody has anything to say and wants to unmute about how you agenda part of that notice in advance, so that I, as the consumer or the public person or the academic, can have some notice as to what the content of the issues to be discussed, so that I can decide whether to attend or not. So if anybody has anything they need to say about your notice issue, in Florida, they obviously notice it up through their administrative register. Other comments about noticing matters up? We'll keep going. So how is your agenda developed? Anybody want to unmute and just give us a thumbnail sketch of that?
This is Jerry in Pennsylvania. We have a template where we have the acting commissioners speak, the board chairs speak, the board administrators, the prosecuting attorney, our board counsel, our counsel that assists us with regulatory matters, and then we intersperse other items that, of course, with prior notice, and that's published in the agenda. So prior, so that's what we do in Pennsylvania.
And Jerry, since we have you, if you want, are you on the board or are you exec?
No, I am on the board. I made it up to chair. Woohoo!
Excellent. Well, congratulations. Good for you. And that pay raise that came along with it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, huge.
Jerry, if you want, so you're the board chair. If you want something on the agenda, can you just add it?
I generally consult with on my board administrator as well as my board counsel, because I don't want to misstep and put something on there that would be inappropriate. But I also do want to try to generate more discussions, because our board meetings tend to be more operational than generative discussions, and I'd like to have the opportunity for more generative discussions.
Put it on the agenda. That's a great idea. And I like how you're thinking. Now, if I'm on the Pennsylvania board, but I'm not the chair, and I want something on the agenda, what do I do? If I'm a board member and
if you're another board member, oftentimes they reach out to me and they'll say, I'm thinking about this. And I say, just, tell Michelle, we'll put it on the agenda and we can have a discussion. So,
Excellent. Michelle's the exec?
yeah,
Executive-
she is.
Got it.
She
Okay. All
is.
right.
She's amazing.
So there's do the board members know this, since I still have you? Do the board members know that they can just contact the executive director and say, I want to put X on the agenda, and it goes on it?
Yeah, yes, they do, but I think I don't, yes, they are informed of that in orientation, but there's a lot of stuff in orientation. So we try to always remind folks at either during the board chair's discussion or the board administrator makes comments in the board meeting as a reminder to the other board members that they're welcome to bring topics up.
Got it. And I see another chat in here, as well as the administrator and the board chair work to build the they're building the agenda, I think is what this is addressing. So I think a lot of folks follow that Pennsylvania model and others that exist there. I think it's wise to involve executive directors or administrators and your council to make sure that matters are added to the agenda that are appropriate and that are within the scope of the authority of the board and that are timely or what have you. So there's a lot of factors to take into consideration related to developing that agenda, modifying that agenda, excuse me, and ensuring again that you can cover all the matters in a timely basis, depending upon the expectations of how long that meeting is supposed to last or will last ultimately. So think about agenda development, because we're going to get to that in just in a slide or two here, and that is developing an agenda itself, some kind of a model. But before we get there, let's talk about presiding over the meeting. So we've got some board chairs who are on the line today, and I think it is really critical to understand the role that a presiding officer plays, assuming they are actually presiding over the meeting. So before we get there, let's start with, are there any boards represented today on the line, or executive directors or administrators, where the administrator or executive director preside over the meeting? Does anybody follow that model? I don't think that occurs in many of the professions, but the role that's understood and played sometimes can become a little muddied with that. So I'm going to make an assumption that you have a presiding officer, a chair, a president, whatever they're called, and that person presides over the board meeting itself. And there's an art, I think, to running a good board meeting as a presiding officer. So we have roles that are played here, and I've got the three listed there: the presiding officer, the exec, and the attorney. And I've been to board meetings where the exec and or attorney dominate the meeting, and maybe there's a reason for that at times, but understanding the roles and the ultimate decision-making authority can be very important to an efficient and effective board meeting and how that might be run. So take that into consideration. And any presiding officer that's on the line today, did you get any training as to how to run a board meeting? And is the training just historically attending the meeting, or did you actually have any formal training from your exec, from your attorneys, or from anyone else that wants to unmute and or put in the chat?
In Pennsylvania, I was on the board previously, so I learned from Cindy Potter, who's an amazing mentor. But also the executive director helps coach me along, and I've presided at our National Association, our chapter, as a president, and just observing in Pennsylvania as well as at national meetings, how presidents conduct board meetings and things like that. So it's been a accumulation of information. Do I misstep? Oh, yes. Yes. And and but my board counsel and my executive director, if I try to say, okay, you're ready for the vote, no, we kind of haven't done the second for the motion, but they are very kind and patient, and the meetings generally move pretty smoothly.
Excellent. I see a comment as well about coaching from the executive director, receiving that. And I don't want to focus on the negative side, but if you have a board chair preceding you that is not a really good board chair, and that's what you learn from, you may end up in a different situation as well. So that can happen, but I'm happy to hear Pennsylvania has good mentors and role models to follow. Again, today's session and your opportunities and communication efforts through FSBPT can be helpful in deciding this. But I know one of my clients has, and I do a ton of board member training, and some of you may know that, may have attended the workshops of FSBPT, but one of my clients has if you will, training, and we're getting away from the word training, but a workshop attended by the executive director and the board chair. And they come together from multiple jurisdictions, and we have discussions about meetings just like we're trying to have today, and what constitutes a good meeting, and the relationships and communications that go on between the chair and the exec, in between board meetings, the chair and the attorney, if that happens, and then when the board comes together, how you can have that effective meeting itself and become an effective and efficient board. So these are opportunities to be had. Today is supposed to be merely just the stimulus behind perhaps other programs that you might suggest be had that can then give you some of the benefits and help Jerry and other presiding officers about running those meetings themselves. So I put down what I thought were a few important just phrases or words that are important to a presiding officer: to be deferential, and to be inclusive, to not dominate the discussions. I've sat in on meetings where the board chair makes a passionate speech to identify the issue, and then there's very little discussion because that position has already been taken and made known. So there's these lines of being too participatory as the board chair versus being deferential and inclusive, and then the board chair weighs in maybe near the end of the discussions rather at the start. And there's no right or wrong, but again, I think you figure out what works best, not only for you individually as a presiding officer, but for the makeup of the board. You may have a very quiet board, you may have a very participatory board, and that you're going to flex as a presiding officer. Timeliness, sticking to the agenda, matters to a vote as needed in a time. It can be delicate situations, but rely upon your board to identify, as Jerry has already mentioned, we're not ready for a vote yet. Not only because we didn't get a second, but we want to have more discussion or whatever it might be. So, and then lastly, and I carry Elmo everywhere I go. So here's my Elmo, and everybody knows what Elmo is. Enough, let's move on. So as presiding officer, sometimes you have to play the Elmo card as needed. But being a presiding officer is an art, I think, and it's something that takes experience, and it may take some trainings and workshops that exist. So take advantage of that. We've got references to parliamentarians as well. So following Robert's rules, or having some kind of order to the board meetings themselves. So sorry, I'm reading these chats and comments. So the roles we've talked about: presiding officer, board members, participate, be prepared, meaningfully participate, executive director and administrator, provide certain data and information, the attorneys and guests and others. We've already now talked about, well, do guests get to speak? Is there a public comment agenda item? And if you have those, many boards do, by the way, if you have those, you don't need to comment on what it is the public is bringing to the table. Let them speak and say thanks and go on to the next one. Those are not times to get into debates with issues that might come up, especially if they are complex, deep, controversial topics that would be brought up by guests that attend. So I've already emphasized this, and go back and if you have time and watch the session on minutes, they're absolutely critical, key. So how your meetings are documented to tell a story. So what I thought we can do in our last couple of minutes here, and if Jeff or any of the FSBPT staff that are listening in want to take a few notes, Can we build an agenda together? Can we put down items that you all think should be on every board meeting's agenda? And they may be generic or they may become a little bit more specific. But does anybody have any ideas that you want to throw out? Feel free to unmute and just shout them out. We'll just start writing them down.
Review of the minutes from the last meeting,
Okay,
edits, deletions, approval.
got it. So minutes and approval. Anything else? What comes to mind for those listening in?
Strategic plan, reviewing that in terms of
Okay.
where you're at, in terms of where you're going.
Excellent. Strategic plan. Others? Just throw the topics out. We're going to write them all down. I'll help stimulate a little bit. I'll help stimulate a little
Approval
bit.
of licenses
Got it.
or
Okay.
and
So
also
applications and renewals. Got it. Okay. And
then
go ahead.
enforcement actions.
Enforcement, okay, complaints and all those. And I want to emphasize that while we are speaking very generically, I understand some of the boards on the line today may not do some of these issues, so I get it. But let's make a comprehensive list and then it can make it applicable to you all. So we got complaints, we've got, and Jeff is writing these into the chats as well, but so in my head, and I think the veterans on the line today, you've heard these probably enough, and we probably have some newer appointees or newer staff to boards that may not have experienced enough, but you're going to talk about the notice that was given up to make sure that the meeting was duly noticed as required by law. You're going to talk about attendance, who's here, we're establishing a quorum, and maybe sometimes who's not there can become important, especially if it's someone who doesn't show up to board meetings on a regular basis. Vacancies, I should have put that up there as a specific item, but I just put attendance in general. Vacancies, I would note vacancies, and I might note in the record that end up in the minutes that the vacancy has existed for 24 months. And we ask that the appointing authority please fill the vacancy, assuming you can do that diplomatically. The mission statement, I'd read it into the record, the purpose, and if you don't have one, maybe you develop one. Or if there's a legislative declaration in the statute itself, read the legislative declaration. The practice of physical therapy is determined to be a professional practice affecting public health, safety, and welfare, and in need of regulation. And the public has a right to have qualified people, undertaking physical therapy and assistance services, etc. So read that into the record every single time. It's important. You're identifying it. You are telling yourselves that, reminding yourselves, and you're telling the rest of the world we know what we're doing. Statistics, updates on those from staff, hits to the website, phone calls, applications, renewals, how many granted, how many not, how many denied, how many remain pending, on average, how long it took, and you could do the same thing with renewals, complaints, resolutions of complaints, settlement orders, and others. Legislative updates, and I know I'm going fast here in the last couple of minutes here, but the slide exists and these slides belong to you, so feel free to use them to the extent you need to. Legislative updates, what's going on in the legislature, your communications as a board with the legislatures, which I think are lacking in general, but perhaps can be more robust. Regulatory updates, complaint updates, board performance. How often you talk about, are we an effective and efficient board? It's kind of strategic, maybe generative thinking, but well, how are we going to determine that? And you've already identified several statistics and others that might indicate that the regulatory board are in need of tightening up our application and renewal process. So as Ohio brought up, maybe that's on the agenda to renew applications. And maybe if the board doesn't meet very often and the board makes that decision, you need to consider a policy that says, well, let's delegate this decision-making to staff who can make those decisions in between board meetings, and we'll ratify them come the next board meeting. And you may not want to do that, but I'm just throwing these out as efficiency-driven ideas. Same thing with complaints and others. Public comment. We've already talked about that enough. Some of you do that, some of you don't. Outreach, internal and external, communicating intrastate, interstate, communicating with other boards within the jurisdiction, communicating with the schools, within with the trade and others that exist. FSBPT, I'm an advocate for, and obviously this is on behalf of my clients, but FSBPT being on every board agenda. And you may have very little to say, or you may say, I went to an annual meeting, it was the best meeting I've ever been to. And I learned a lot, and I'm bringing back a lot of ideas for us as a board, whatever it takes.
And just a shout out to utilize your board liaison. You know, we're there to observe and learn from you. If we can attend your board meeting, we'd love to. But also to get your feedback and bring it back to the board to see if we can also help other jurisdictions. So please utilize that. Sorry to interrupt, Dale, but go ahead.
No, no problem. Absolutely. That's a great point. Most of my clients have liaisons, just like you described. Try to attend the board meetings. And Ira's point, you're attending virtually. That allows you to have more access as opposed to in person and others. So all of these opportunities, whether they are in person and or virtual, can be potentially helpful. I see a board meeting evaluation. These are great ideas. And I think we all have the tendency to grade ourselves in a very good way. But if you could have critical evaluations where you provide the opportunity to say, here's how things went well, and here's perhaps how they didn't, to say, since the last board meeting, here's how I feel, or the packets came out too late, or I don't know, whatever it is that you can provide yourselves with to best be prepared. And then my last couple of comments dealing with trade, academics, the educational programs and others, get that word out. You all have the right to go into a closed or executive session where the public doesn't attend, and the efficiencies and the effectiveness of that obviously is relevant as well. Seek legal advice as to how to go into executive session, how to come out, and how minutes, if you will, or matters are taken into consideration within that executive session. So follow advice on that. So we're in our last couple of minutes. So one, I'm hoping that these remarks help stimulate some ideas. As I said at the outset, this is a difficult topic because you can't just draw a map and say this is how it should work and how best work, because you're all very different. You all have different governance structures and otherwise, but perhaps this is the start to stimulating some continued discussions about what constitutes a board meeting, a good board meeting, and how you can perform as effectively and efficiently as possible. So I will end my remarks, Stephen, by just saying how I started. A big shout out, thanks to the board of directors of FSBPT for what you do. Shout out to, and obviously a big shout out, thanks to each and every one listening to me for a bit. And I so appreciate and am inspired by the volunteerism that I'm surrounded by. So, Stephen, I'll turn it back to you and for any closing remarks.
Great. Well, thank you, Dale. I want to extend a sincere thank you to you as well for your insightful, engaging presentation on board meetings, a difficult topic, and we were talking before that, but, your expertise on this and clarity in navigating this, I think, is extremely valuable. And then for this forum, again, thank you for your contribution and continued support for our professional development on this and other areas that you present on. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone gets a chance to review this again, share this with your peers on the board, and hopefully you can learn together as a group. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.